Today's talk is called Evolution, Everybody's Journey. And it again was inspired by, what's going on now. But Teilhard de Chardin's quote that we had up at the beginning. He was an evolutionary thinker and is much in vogue now with, 100 years after he was writing this stuff. So things take time. Uh, you know, with there's just so much happening on the planet now, which is great in a way. Uh, but when you think of the migration going on, the refugees, which unfortunately, in some countries are called aliens or something like that, but they're really just human beings that have always migrated. We all started in Africa and then we ended up in Scandinavia or Lapland. I mean, how does that happen? We've been migrating for the whole history of human race here. And, whether it's climate related, whether it's war in your area, whether it's just violence, uh, millions of people are on the move. Things are changing. And how we relate to that. Well, Teilhard was thinking about that 100 years ago, and we need to think about it now. When the Buddhists take the refuge vow, uh, they realize that all humans are refugees until you find your refuge in uh, the Buddha nature, in the heart. That's why we call this place heart to heart. We're trying to really um, find that, the Buddha said everything changes. Well, we're trying to find a place to take refuge in something that is not a thing. It's even hard to talk about it because our language is to thing in a way. We'll look at that. But we're talking about evolution, and I've got a poem I wrote 16 years ago yesterday. Yesterday was my grandson Devin's birthday. 16 years. I still have a picture of him up in the Zendo, taking the day he was born. Well, I wrote this 16 years ago, and it's actually still true. I want to start with it. It's called Everybody's Journey, and goes like this. I've got basically a couple of poems, this old but true poem, and then a new poem that's been forming all week, and then in between we'll sort of look at the spiritual journey in terms of consciousness. We'll sort of reflect on all this. But here's the poem, Everybody's Journey, and starts with a little quote from the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. I don't know about you, but it feels like we're sort of living in Wonderland when everything's turned upside down. The Mad Hatter said to Alice one time, "How you travel is where you arrive." So some interesting wisdom in that. How you travel is where you arrive. So this is called Everybody's Journey. All of us come wailing into this world, trailing clouds of glory that are all too soon forgotten. And there we are once again, feeling like we're nobody. But with the help of our family, friends, mentors, therapists, or lifetimes of struggle, we can become somebody. And only then, via some sort of contemplative practice, can we become everybody. All of us, without exception, are at one point or another on this journey. So walk on, my brothers and sisters, walk on, and never forget to remember who we really are. Yeah, that's the journey from nobody to somebody to everybody. What the Dalai Lama sort of spurred that when I heard him back in the 70s and early 80s when he was sitting with psychiatrists and stuff and psychologists. The the hip psychologists that were bringing Buddhism in misunderstood Buddhism. They said the whole idea is to go from being somebody to nobody. They were trying to grapple with this Buddhist concept of no self. And when the Dalai Lama spoke, he said, "Well, he said maybe that's right, but we don't see it that way." He said, "We start as nobody, and then through a lot of effort and growth, we become somebody. But then the big deal, the end of the deal, is to become everybody." Well, what does that really mean? And it was subtle, but back then, and Buddhism always had this view that that this sort of three-tiered journey of consciousness from being nobody. We're born as little infant. We don't even have a name. We don't have a birth certificate. I remember seeing Devin. I got a picture of him right here on the altar, where he was just crying away, wailing. And all these big beings running around. Who am I? He didn't even, like I said, didn't even have a name yet. And so we start as nobody. And that is pre-rational consciousness, okay? That's where we start. We start as a sentient being. We have sentience. And it's all about the body. We really haven't developed higher consciousness yet. Okay, and then this is the survival operating system that we all start in, and we're trying to have it's the instinctual level of consciousness. Okay, this nobody state. Sometimes babies aren't named for a long time, especially if there's some problem there. And this is how we all start. And we have instinctive needs. We need to survive. That's why I call this the childhood operating system, the survival operating system. We need to survive. We need to secure. We need security. Imagine babies being born in the war areas of the world: Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan. There's no security there, but that's an instinctive need that we all have for security, and that's what got us through childhood. We have an instinctive need for affection, be held, okay, and we have an instinctive need for that grows as we grow with to have some sense of power and autonomy and control. In the beginning, we can't even turn over. And so these basic instinctual needs of security, affection, warmth, being held, holding, as the psychologists talk about a holding environment, and then a sense of autonomy and power and control. This all develops up to probably about the age of 5 or 6, and this is our operating system. Okay, and it's totally appropriate for that age, and that's the first tier of consciousness. Ken Wilber breaks each of these 3 tiers: nobody, somebody, everybody, into 3. So he talks about nine sort of stages of consciousness, and it's worth reading that. But I caught it, I think, based on the Dalai Lama, that we start as nobody. Just this little sentient being, just an it. We don't even know about others, really. We see these blur. What do we make of these huge beings running around? Okay. All right. And of course, the motivation at this stage of consciousness is fear. Thank goodness, because it motivates us to uh, find mommy somehow. Cry, we cry, and then mommy holds us, and then if she likes us, she'll hold us more, and so we start. This is our primitive first operating system, childhood operating system. Okay, and it's tribal because the people we know are our tribe. In this world, maybe it's a mother only. You could be raised by a single mother. Maybe it's a mom and a dad. Maybe you have siblings. Some people are born into large communities, uh, especially if you live in a village and somewhere in the world, your birth is greeted by lots of sets of eyes. But still, we still have these instinctive needs. Nothing wrong with them, but when you talk about the march of consciousness, this everybody's journey, we were meant to. That got us out of childhood. We go to school at 6. We start our brain, our frontal cortex is still developing, but it takes a while before you can even access reason. They used to tell us in grade school that age 7 was the age of reason, when reason starts dawning on you. Well, maybe that's right. Maybe when you look at the world, you wonder if it's dawned on a lot of adults that are running things. But yeah, so somewhere we're able to go out of object permanence, as they say, and actually think about things, reason. Okay, and so that's the rational. So we start in pre-rational, and then we can develop reason, rationality, thinking. Great, it's a great leap, and that's all fine. That's beautiful. You know, reason brought us Zoom so we could communicate. Reason and science brought me these two uh, titanium knees and brought Ron the stents that kept us alive. Reason has, so it's great. Now, what it really means to move along with consciousness from the first tier to the second, it means to transcend it, to go beyond it, but it also means to include everything that is beneficial about that first, in this case, that first instinctual stage. You know, if we don't survive, we're not going to thrive and develop our consciousness. So, certain amount of instinct is helpful. Um, the basic thing for the first stage of consciousness, the pre-rational, is go towards pleasure, avoid pain. Go towards pleasure, avoid pain. That's what any sentient single-celled organism does. Goes towards something that fulfills a need, pulls away from the pain. And now, if that goes on throughout life, if that needs to be left behind, uh, mostly. When you're an adult and you're walking in the city and you just turn a corner and you're on a street that just your gut tells you don't walk down this street. That's that's the good aspect of instinct. Sometimes you just know I'm not walking down this street, or in some situations, when a car swerves over the center line and you're really not, you don't think you're paying attention, but there it is, and taking Ron back from the hospital, we almost got killed by a gravel truck. It was way over the line, and just at the last minute, I swerved. It wasn't something I thought about. I didn't reason it, and luckily we avoided it. And he jerked the other way too. So you transcend. You include the helpful things that from the first tier, but you don't. You leave behind the limiting things. All those voices that are still bugging you. You'll never be good enough. You don't belong. All that can't. Those are voice structures that were defensive in nature, because our whole operating system, as we were children, was about survival, but also avoiding being hurt avoiding being frightened, and also avoiding being forgotten. Those three emotional states. Physical hurt, yeah, but this is emotional hurt. Uh, and avoided frightening situations and avoiding being forgotten. You're born into a family of 12 and, your mother just, you feel like you don't count. That's, that goes, somehow that reality becomes a voice. A lot of voices come on, and we got to notice which ones are now limiting voices as you transcend to reason. Now, reason is the rational state is you can become somebody, which means you start to have a role. You're a student now, and maybe all the way along you get these roles. You have a self now. In the first tier of consciousness of a young child, uh, selfhood and roles don't come yet. You're just sort of like a it, uh, and but now what comes with rational consciousness is this idea of a self and a role. Oh, I'm a student now. Oh, and then maybe I'm a paper boy, or maybe I do this or I do that. We get these roles, the self. Now, where the first tier of consciousness, the pre-rational, is basically body-centered. Now the mind is developing. It's absolutely evolutionary in terms of physical, too. The frontal cortex, parts of the mind develop, and we can think about things. It becomes more strategic. You can, if you're still hooked on those instinctual needs to where they're demands, well, then you use your mind to feel more secure. You use your mind to get people's affection and now esteem. There's other people there, and how do they look at you? And then you use your mind. It weaponizes actually those things, and then you can actually give power and control. You'll be first in the class. You can become mommy's favorite. Okay, and now you're not a it. It's there's an I, me, okay? And everything else is an it, though, at this stage. If you haven't really, as you develop, I mean, that's just normal. Then there's all this stuff out there in me, and how can I control it to actually have pleasure and avoid pain? That's how we grow up, and fear lessens at this point. And now the dominant fuel really of the strategic mind is anxiety, which is not the same as fear. We can go back to fear in a minute, where and then we go back to our 6-year-old self, bomb the uh, bomb the Twin Towers, and all of a sudden the nation went from an anxious nation to a fearful nation, and then all those things that came from that. We passed all kinds of laws, crazy laws that didn't really make us safer, but that was the whole idea: safety, security. We went back to the root chakra, as they call it, in the chakra system. Everything was about fear and security. Okay, yeah. Those are the first two tiers: the pre-rational and the rational, and that's how the ego develops. The ego is really this 6-year-old plan when we're 6 years old to be secure, to garner affection and esteem, and then power and control. And it can get, with the mind now that kicks in, we can find more strategic ways to have those needs met. Okay, so and they're fear and anxiety fuels us. It's like the fuel of this kind of consciousness, and you can sort of feel that. When you're the separate self, when you're I, and there on all these its, and you figure there's 7 or 8 billion eyes out there, and they all think they're the center of the universe. And we want all this stuff for me. Well, everybody, a lot of people playing that game, and the odds of actually getting it, what you're looking for that way, don't they go down? As the world gets, but it's just natural development. But you can transcend that into the third tier, which is the transrational tier. So we have pre-rational, tribal. I mean, you wonder about why things have become so uh, divided and actually tribal. Our politics are like tribal now. Well, that consciousness is there, and it hasn't been really transcended and dealt with, and so it's easy to fall into tribal. You look at war. War is essentially tribal. There's our tribe, and then we'll wipe out that tribe, and then we'll be secure. And it's we've had a it's always been there because that consciousness has always been there, but we're we're transcending it. We're not, we haven't worked it all out yet, but we're going beyond it. But we have to include the good stuff and leave the self-limiting stuff behind. And as long as you're making war, when you're involved in war, you're in that first tier of consciousness. Imagine being in Gaza, being in Sudan, where there's tribal warfare essentially with automatic weapons now. I mean, yeah. So the tribe and the village life, and then we have cities and nations, which, if you relate to that level, you're in the rational level, and that's we built up cities, nations. At first, the city states were warring, now nations are warring, but that cooled off for a while. But now that's coming back. It's not fully integrated yet. Now, the third tier consciousness, the everybody stage, again, nobody, somebody, everybody. Um, that's different entirely, because the first two stages of consciousness, they perceive by differentiation. They perceive by separation. One of these things is not like the other, as they say in Sesame Street. They show a picture of a dog and a cat. Yeah, well, actually, they're two sentient beings. Could get along, They're all, but no, that's really how the left brain works when you bring on reason, and that's good. It's great for analysis and all that kind of stuff, but it's not so great because it divides. Now, the third stage, when the Dalai Lama says you become everybody, it's a different kind of perception. It's holistic, and it's what they call non-dual. It's what the non-two means. The not two means that I have there, that is a kind of consciousness that doesn't see division. It doesn't really, it just sees human beings, for instance, and then it just sees other sentient beings, that we're all in this family. It doesn't see, it sees by wholeness. And it can become it's not a state, like if you do some kind of psychoactive drug, you can have this feeling of oneness or whatever, but that's a state. As soon as the drug wears off, well, you're back in this divided consciousness with all this unmetabolized stuff from our early childhood. We all have stuff from early childhood. Those are the voices that bug us. Those are the voices that divide us, you see. Now, non-dual consciousness, trans-rational consciousness, uh, the wisdom states, uh, they can become a stage, which is a kind of stable thing. It doesn't come and go, and it doesn't depend on a substance. You can actually transcend rationality, which doesn't mean to become irrational. It becomes to become transrational, which means you take all the good stuff from rationality. I mean, Teresa of Avila, that's what it really means to be a saint. Really, you've sort of transcended, and you're into the non-dual. I mean, she reformed a couple of orders, told off a couple of popes. I mean, she had a mind that was keen, so she didn't leave. She didn't become irrational, because you can't accomplish a lot of things when you're irrational. She became transrational, and then she could also, in her prayer time, and she could describe it even using words that her the seven, the interior castle, as she called it. And, Meister Eckhart, Merton, these guys were into the transrational. They were into the everybody category. So nobody, somebody, everybody. And it's not so much that it's some special state at all. It's that it's over years of a kind of practice. Again, nobody enters this without a kind of contemplative practice, and then that practice just sort of over time erases that line that divides everything. That divides the field into us and them, into black and white, into Republican, Democrats, you name it. Yeah, over time, and this is slow work. Teilhard said one of his great quotes was, "Joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God. Above all, trust the slow work of God." And evolution is slow work in an individual life and also in the whole life of the planet. There's still people in tribal consciousness that are with weapons now that, I heard Steve Bannon talking about what's to come, and he said, well, we don't need reasonable men. He said, we're not reasonable men, and we're going to change things. This is like tribal talk. It's like saying, well, reason won't do anything. We got guns and we're gonna do it. But he said, we don't want reasonable men. If you're reasonable men, don't come. Well, that's regression on a huge scale. So fear, fear is what's going on in politics right now. And can we drum up enough fear to get people to turn out to vote? So it's very tribal, but there's a candidate that's basing on fear and revenge and wiping out the other side, and somebody else who's trying to work at the level of reason. It'll be very interesting how it turns out electorally. So fear, anxiety, the anxiety everybody feels, along with fear about the election. Reasonable folks, rational folks fear that. Anxiety comes because there's a split. There's me and them, basically in the first two kind of tiers. So it's cooler than fear. You can function. It's hard to function in fear. Now, the fuel for the non-dual, transrational, the everybody state is love. See? So we have these three states of consciousness, these tiers of consciousness, and they run on different fuel. Fear for the tribal consciousness, the childhood operating system. Anxiety, always a little bit of anxiety, because there's only one of me and all these others. Could turn into Lord of the Flies at any time when you have that kind of mind. And then finally, the transrational, the everybody state of consciousness, which doesn't see enemies. It sees ecology, that we're part of all of this. I'm looking out the window here. We're part of the daylilies blooming out there. We're part of the birds. We're part of, who is your neighbor? Who isn't your neighbor when you get to this point? St. Francis called everything, brother, sun, sister, moon, the whole bit. Yeah. And there your consciousness goes from a tribe and a village, from a city to a nation, and finally you have a kind of planetary, cosmic consciousness. The saints and other people, when they, what you relate to. A nation state doesn't is nobody, no mystic pledges allegiance to a nation state. They're pledging their allegiance to the cosmos, you see, to life, okay, because they're living in love. Now, body, mind, heart. Okay, that's why this is called heart to heart, because we're working on this journey to where our center is in the heart. Doesn't mean we don't have a mind. It doesn't mean we don't have a body. No, as a matter of fact, part of the thing when you're working with meditation practices is to be embodied. You know, a lot of times if you just think it's about the mind, that doesn't work. We don't throw anything out that's helpful. The body, the mind, integrated, and the Eastern Orthodox guys talk about dropping the mind into the heart. That's what the Jesus prayer was all about. A way to put the mind into the heart. So again, it's not irrational. A lot of people think if spirituality or something just made up or irrational. Reason not enough. Reason is great, but it's not enough. Okay. And so that's just sort of a quick, that's what he really means about when you become everybody, it means you're not seeing a separation. You don't factor it in. The heart does not separate. The heart resonates with it's the sacred heart, the immaculate heart, as people have these words for it. The Buddha nature. Your true nature doesn't operate by division. It sees things as a whole. That's why the circle is an image of that. See. Okay. So how do we develop that? Well, like I said in the poem, they said you can get to be somebody in this culture. I mean, I was sort of somebody. I was a classroom teacher. I was Mr. Z. But when you get older, no matter who you are, you become an FIP, as they call it. I love that little anagram. You become a formally important person. And we have some who are really important, by the way, the cultures of the people in this group who are considered important by our culture. Teachers now aren't really even considered important in our culture, which tells you something about our culture. But as you age, you become a formally important person. In other words, you lost these roles that define you. You go from role to soul is another way of talking about how you go from the second tier consciousness to the third. And this poem, which I printed last week, but I still had another stanza to go. I want to end with this, and it's sort of our guide because this divine that's in a song, which Rumi and Jesus and a lot of people coming out of the Middle East, they called it love. Dante called it love, the love that moves our sun and all the other stars. The thing we're trying to align with, the divine, the thing that's not a thing, doesn't change in a way. It's the only thing that doesn't change because it's not a thing in the first place. It's hard to even talk about it, isn't it? It's tricky. But it has both energy. When he says it's the love is the force that moved the sun and all the other stars. There's an energy of the whole universe there, so there's vitality, but there's direction. That's the thing, What is the vision of what this life means? You got like people say, well, life's a bitch and then you die. I saw that on a t-shirt once. That's a view. It's all random. Life's a bitch and then you die. Maybe, grab as much gusto as you can during your lifetime, but in the end, it's lights out and that's it. That's one view. Then there's sort of the American consumer view. Whoever dies with the most toys wins. We become more by accumulating. We're a consumer society. But that's, when you die, people fight over what's left, or, there's no hearses that have U-Hauls behind them, so you can't take it with you. That's another view. Then there's a third view, which is that this is directional, that we're actually like, I have a big stained glass window up there that somebody donated years ago when this first opened that has the Omega, the end of the Greek alphabet, Alpha and to the Omega, that it is the thing we're all going to. That's what uh, Teilhard called where what's just pulling us all, this omega point, which for him was love. The force of love is leading to where, you know, we stop beating up on each other. We stop stealing from each other. I think we got a long way to go. This is slow work, but that there's something that we're heading towards. Now, in this poem, "Align with Your Divine," uh, I think it puts it better than I've been able to put it before. It goes like this, and it's what we're doing here. If we really look at it, we're here to align with our inner divine. We take the time to align with our inner divine in wordless, co-abiding communion. We lay thinking aside and return, release, and rest in the center that is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. We drop the mind into the heart slowly, slowly. As we drop the mind into the heart, slowly blooms the rose within. Slowly blooms the rose within. Yeah. Just a little reflection on that. That's sort of the blueprint, at least for meditation, is the way I see it. You got to, first of all, you have to take time to do this. And if you're really serious about, vision is like a pole star, like the North Star, And if you decide to dedicate your life at some point, and it makes a lot of sense when you're 75. Do I need more money? Do I need more stuff? To dedicate. I'm dedicating my last years to awakening, to becoming more intimate and aligned with my own inner divine. When you do that, it creates a pole star of each day. I start my day sitting, doing just what we're doing. Start with aligning to it. The heart is also an organ of alignment. When we put our two hands together, that's the two become one, you say. And it's kind of an alignment kind of thing. So but you have to create the time. You have to make the time to align with your inner divine in wordless, co-abiding communion. Just let that image there. That's what it is. It's wordless. We may use a few words and chant or something as a preliminary, but then you're in the silence beyond words, spoken words. The mind keeps talking to you, of course. Well, you have to learn to deal with that. But basically, we become wordless, and we're in co-abiding communion. The inner divine, the Buddha nature, it's not going anywhere. It's been there from the very beginning. This talk is just trying to call your attention to it, that it's always there. It doesn't change. It's waiting. It's abiding there. And then we got a shot when we actually take out some time in the day and show up every day to just it's sort of like if you have an Apple Watch, you just put it on this little circle thing at night and it charges it up. You show up, you put it on the thing, it charges, and the next day it works. You don't do that, it doesn't work so well the next day or at all. So it's kind of the sense of we abide with the thing that's always abiding with us in co-abiding communion. That's a good definition of contemplative prayer, centering prayer, any kind of meditation. There's this happening, you see. And then we lay thinking aside, and every form of meditation that I've ever practiced, finds a way to sort of put a stick in the spoke of the spinning wheel of thoughts and etc. And voices in the head. And so, you find a way to sort of, in a way, put a spoke into that and stop it for a while. Because that's the cloud cover. I mean, this goes all the way back to the great eclipse that we had recently. The idea that a tiny little moon could totally eclipse the light of the sun, which is orders of magnitude so much bigger. Well, it's the same with a thought like, oh, Jesus, I'll never amount to anything. These kinds of thoughts. So these thoughts eclipse our ability to abide or even believe that we have anything inside of us that is that powerful. Buddha said it, Jesus said it. I mean, the kingdom of heaven, what everybody thought what came later, the kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is among us, right here, accessible. If you can stop talking and then even stop the inner dialogue for a minute, even a nanosecond. We lay thinking aside and return. What are we returning to? In the silence, in the stillness, we return. We're in it. It's a journey. We release the thoughts. It's over and over. Every kind of meditation has a way to release. And then we rest with our inner divine. We rest in the center that is everywhere, which means you have one, I have one. People in Rwanda have one. The center that's everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. This is not a limited thing. This is unlimited. This is throughout the universe. There is no limit to that true nature, to that Buddha nature, to that inner divine. It's not limited by your physical body. You're connecting with everything. The center that is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. And then finally, as we drop the mind into the heart, slowly blooms the rose within. Slowly blooms the rose within. That rose was the image of Dante, who made this journey, the Commedia, the journey through hell and the climbing up the 7-story mountain. And then finally he gets to paradise, which is this white rose. There's levels all the way through. It was a magnificent journey just to read the comedy. And he called it a comedy because it ends well. That's a classic bully. A comedy can have all kinds of bad stuff happen, which, that is the world. But you can make it. That 3-tiered hell, purgatory, heaven, there's 3 tiers of consciousness, and that he saw that as a rose. The Sufis see the heart and the paradise as a rose too, but he saw it as a white rose. It wasn't that romantic rose we're thinking about. So as we drop the mind into the heart, slowly, and we got to emphasize slowly. I've personally been doing this, for better or for worse, lost and found for 50 years, and I still got work to do. I still become a 6-year-old at the drop of a hat, as I react to something that happened, but not so much anymore. Not so much anymore. I spend more time in that 3rd tier, and meditation is where you practice. People don't even know what the heart is for a long time. I didn't know about it until you don't. Every day you sit down and you just try to lay thoughts aside, get quiet, see what happens. Once you do that, once you bring yourself back, you drop a thought, you bring yourself back just to being here, then the rest is out of your hands. You can't control the process, but it is coming back into this wordless, co-abiding sense of communion with something that isn't a thing, that has immense power. Yeah. Well, I think that's good enough. That's good enough. We'll take a little break and then we'll come back and practice it. So we'll come back at 15 after the hour. Okay. All right. Thanks so much for listening.